Välkomna till Se människan-scenen, Svenska kyrkans scen här på Bokmässan. Vi kommer nu att få höra ett samtal på engelska med writer and journalist Joris Luyendjik and former Archbishop KG Hammar. Welcome.
Well, welcome, Joris Luyendjik, Dutch and British journalist in economic questions and writer now. And the first book in Swedish is this one, Simma med hajar, to swim with sharks. We'll come back to the title, comparing with what you're writing later on. But it is about the 2008 financial crisis. I hope you haven't forgotten about this crisis. We were very close to, at least you think that we were very close to a financial meltdown. And you are trying to understand how could it happen and will it happen again. And as a journalist, you try to start with a simple question and then you widen the scope and you hope that we readers will then be able to follow, because actually no one of us understands really this financial heart of the world. That is your message. You had practiced that method earlier on electric cars, which seemed to be a bit easier to explain. And now you are a teacher for us, and as we on the Church of Sweden scene has asked this journalist to come and present the book, it's because we think not only that we want to learn, but also we must ask ourselves, can we contribute in some way to a change which you say is necessary?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, good. Thank you. More louder. Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I think this book, the reason I wrote this book and the way I wrote it is because I began to realize that the financial sector is probably the most important part of our society in terms of our economy. And there isn't a book that starts at the beginning. So before I started this project, I knew nothing about finance. And so I went looking for books that would start at the level that I was. I had no idea what an investment bank is, or a trader, or hedge funds. And there's basically nothing except for very boring, almost like a biology, like an investment bank breaks into this and this. And so I thought, how do I open it up? And I thought, what is the question that you and I want to know, even if you don't know what an investment bank is? And that is, how can these bankers live with themselves? Now, after they did all these things to us, how can they live with themselves? And so I thought, that's what I'm going to ask them. And so I spoke to 200 of them, and they do very well. They can perfectly live with themselves.
But the main rule in that world is to be incognito and to keep the secret.
Yes.
And that's the problem, of course, for journalists.
Yes. It's when you start working for Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, first day they tell you, look, if you ever speak to a journalist or an academic, then not only will we fire you, but we will send our lawyers after you, and we have very good lawyers, and we will make sure that you will never work in finance again. And so it's a culture of fear and a culture of silence. And that makes it very difficult for journalists to open up this world. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's still so little. For example, if you want to know more about theoretical physics or about evolutionary biology, you can buy these beautiful DVDs with interviews with people working in evolutionary biology, theoretical physics. If you want to know about banking, there isn't even one DVD with just interviews with bankers. They are not allowed to speak to us. So the only time we hear of them is when they need to be bailed out, when they need our money.
Yeah, okay. And this is, of course, I mean, if the financial heart of London City is the financial heart of the world, and we are all affected by what they decide to do there, and there is no transparency at all, and transparency is the fundamental character of a democracy.
Yes.
How can democracy survive if we are still run by London City?
I think it cannot. And I think this is becoming really clear with these these increasingly vague words like the markets, for example. Now the European Central Bank is creating all this money, and they're saying we're doing it to calm the markets. But who are the markets? It's almost like the gods. You know, like in Greek and Roman times, when they said, the gods reacted negatively to the speech by Merkel. That's almost like the markets reacted negatively to the speech of Merkel. There's a sense of that democracy is more and more a system where we elect politicians who will then do what the markets tell them. And who the markets are, well, there's very little reporting. So when I realized this, I realized if I manage to actually interview the people in those markets, I will have some really interesting stuff. Because it's usually, we hear mostly CEOs, and they only say the things that they've practiced with their PR department.
And so you say there are no free markets, and what the politicians talk about, and free trade and so on, that's just nonsense when it comes to reality.
Well, it's a vague term, but if you the one character. Before I went in, I thought I'm now going to the heart of capitalism, the financial sector, and then in the financial sector, London, Europe's financial sector. The financial center of Sweden is not Stockholm. The financial center of Holland is not Amsterdam, it's London. So I thought I'm going to find capitalism, but what I found was socialism. Because in capitalism, if you run your bank really badly, you fail. Well, the banks are all still here. In capitalism, there's competition. You know, you ask a taxi driver when Uber comes to town, salaries go down because of competition. In banking, salaries don't go down. So they don't compete and they cannot fail. Well, that's the sort of capitalism that I would love to be part of. And so that's very paradoxical.
And you also want to shake our simple explanation that the problem is greedy people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in Swedish it's called swim with sharks. But actually you shouldn't be very satisfied with that title. It's a very nice title, but you don't consider these people sharks.
No, some of them did, because I'm an anthropologist by training. And so what we do as anthropologists, we ask unusual questions to people in order to draw them out of their comfort zone. So I would always ask those, for example, derivatives traders, technology firms, Europe. I say, but okay, very interesting, but what if you were an animal? What animal in the animal kingdom would you be? And then the traders, they said, I'm a lion, I'm a hyena, I am a shark, I'm a velociraptor. You know, a velociraptor is an extinct flesh-eating dinosaur. That's how they saw themselves. But many others would say, I'm a zebra, or I'm a tortoise. The people had very different senses of themselves. But I think the reason, in Dutch, my native language, it was called This Cannot Be True. That was the title of the book. But if you're an unknown author, and you go to England, and you say, my book is called This Cannot Be True, the English will just say, well, then maybe you should do a bit more studying. And so they came up with Swimming with Sharks. But I think the Hungarian translation is actually best, title is best, and it's called Flying Blind. Is that, to come back to your question, I thought they were greedy, they know exactly what they're doing, but it's even worse. They don't know what they're doing. They were completely surprised by 2008, as surprised as we were. They didn't sell their shares before the crisis, they bought more of them. They believed their own nonsense. And I think this is what is truly frightening about finance. If they were just bad people, we could get rid of the bad people. But they're actually not that bad, I found, but the system pushes them to do things that will ultimately have very bad consequences.
So, if, as you said, if we only had to deal with bad people, we could have done that. But if it's a bad system, it's much more difficult, and the politicians have no real instruments to deal with a bad system.
Yes.
And you have a wonderful image of the airplane, and there is no pilot in the cockpit.
Yes, because I wrote many versions because I wanted the book to be as accessible as possible. And so at some point I showed the version to a friend, and I said, so I wasn't satisfied, I needed an opening image. And I said, so how do you feel after reading the book? And he said, well, considerably more scared. Thank you. I sleep even worse than I did before. And so I thought, that's it. I need an image that conveys fear. And so I thought, what is the world economy? The world economy, we're stuck with these banks. We cannot simply close them because then the whole economy collapses. But we don't know how to dismantle them either. And so we're stuck with them. That's almost like being in an airplane and you have a near crash, say an engine falls off. You look out of the window and you think, what, 2008, an engine falls off. That's terrifying. I'm going to talk to the pilot. I want to have answers because this is terrifying. So you work your way to the pilot, you get past the flight attendant, everybody else saying, no, go back, it's fine, you know, the crisis is over, we're in control. And finally you open the door and you realize there is no pilot. And I think that is our economic system right now. But it's, as a storyteller, it's very difficult. Storytellers, I mean, the Bible is a very good example of heroes who fight a personified evil. So we like stories about bad people. What we cannot really comprehend as human beings is stories about bad systems where we are all in more or less complicit. And that is really difficult. I think we can change things by making better laws. But that's really difficult because then politicians have to see an advantage in making better laws. And right now, if you're a politician, and this is true across Europe and in the US, if you do what the financial sector more or less tells you, there are very nice jobs for you in your so-called second career.
Yes. We have lots of examples also among our politicians that after the second career is to serve the capitalist system and the different corporations and so on.
And if you look at how much money they then make, for example, Tony Blair gets £2.5 million a year for being an advisor to JP Morgan. You do begin to wonder, is that your second career, Tony, or actually your first career?
Yeah.
And running the United Kingdom for a while was just this sort of step towards your real job.
If there was a pilot in the airplane, I mean, the airplane, that's humankind, you could say. We are sitting there, all of us. And the pilot should be moral values. I mean, this is what the history of mankind have moved up to, certain moral values. And in the 20th century, we have really gathered them together in an amazingly extent. But now, if we are submitting to this no pilot, that means that we have no moral values giving us directions. And what is the horrible thing about the world you talk about is that they consider them outside the question of morality, I mean good and bad. They don't call themselves immoral, they call themselves amoral.
Yes.
And can you explain a bit more about that?
Because going in, I would ask, how can you live with yourself? And many said, look, I am amoral. And so the example they always used was The Wolf of Wall Street. I think many have seen the film The Wolf of Wall Street. It's a gambling addicted, coke snorting, whoring psychopath who sells you shares in companies that don't exist. That's the film. That person is immoral. So he knows he breaks the law. He's like Dr. No in James Bond. He says, I'm going to take over the world. That's the sort of bad guy that we love. That's why The Wolf of Wall Street is so successful as a film. The bankers, they tell you, look, I obey the law. I do not break the law. And as long as I don't break the law, I must be innocent. So if I can sell to this Sweden Housing Corporation a derivative within the law that is really bad for the Swedish corporation, but it is allowed, then if they're stupid enough to buy it, I'll sell it to them. If I can sell this complex financial instrument to Greece, which helps Greece to hide its debts and make a lot of money for Goldman Sachs, and it's allowed, then that's what we'll do. And so what was so interesting, this amorality, I'm writing the book. The book comes out across Europe, and I get emails from across Europe from people working for pharmaceutical companies, oil companies, tobacco companies, consumer good companies, telecom companies, and they're saying, actually, that is exactly the atmosphere in my corporation. There's a sense that our shareholders are the owners. They give us one task, which is to make as much money as possible within the law, and that's what we do. And so if we can make a lot of money by pumping more CO2 into the air, we'll do it. If we can get half the Swedish young people addicted to Ritalin, then that's what we'll do, as long as it's allowed. And that's why it was a moral discussion with these people is impossible, because they don't recognize morality as essential for society. They say, no, what we do is just we chase our self-interest, and if everybody does that, the invisible hand will take care that the system is efficient and fair. And when I tell them, I think maybe the invisible hand is invisible because it isn't there, they go, no, that's not what we're taught in business school.
But we talk about climate change, we talk about sustainability, social responsibility, and big companies talk about their corporate social responsibility. We talk about ethical investments and all these things. Is that just external things with no influence upon the real directions of the financial world?
I think it has a little bit of influence, but very little. And I think if push comes to shove, then if shareholders demand as much return as possible, then that is what will happen. And so, and in that sense, I think we are all of us complicit, in the sense that when most of us go to a supermarket, we are also amoral. We just try to buy as much stuff as we can for as little money as possible. Our pension funds are probably invested in these corporations and telling them to make as much profit as possible. So I think there are two ways to change this. One is to vote for politicians who will actually do something about the banks, but the other is to make sure that our pension funds stop telling the banks to make as much money as they can, stop telling Shell to make as much money as they can. And that has proven very difficult. It turns out that people love being angry at the banks, but they find it very difficult to also look at their own responsibility.
You have, the final page, you have a quotation from the Gospel of St. John, where Jesus says to the people around him, the one who is without sin may throw the first stone on the woman there. And you say, actually, we are in the same position. No one is without sin. And you mean this, the global world, and how we in the rich part of the world, we benefit from the poor parts of the world and their work and so on. Yeah. So in that sense, we also, as you said, in every supermarket, we act amorally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it will be very, very difficult to lead your life entirely morally, in the sense of stopping with every decision to ask about its moral implications. Also, how can you have access to all the information necessary to compare? So you, I think, rely on the legislator, on your politicians, to make sure that if something is bad for society, it shouldn't be available in the supermarket. And then the problem is lobbying, the second career, is that politicians know, oh wait, if I do what the meat industry says, I will find a nice job in the meat industry afterwards. And also lobbying, and I think in that sense we are luckier in continental Europe, is that we do not allow corporations to give money to political parties in the same way that it is completely normal in the United Kingdom and in America. I mean, if you go to Africa and you give a lot of money to a politician, we call it corruption. If you then go to America, you do the same thing. It's called campaign finance or campaign donation. And anthropologists love these special words. There's so many special words to describe the corruption in our system as opposed to the corruption in Africa.
And a final question. I mean, we are here in the scene of Church of Sweden. I mean, we don't think that the meaning of life is money or owning things. We call it mammon in the Bible, and this is what you are writing about. And so how could we contribute to a different world? I mean, if it continues like this, we will just go to hell. That's very obvious. But we must find together ways of change. Yes. And how could we, as faith communities, contribute to this change? Yeah.
Well, I think there's already a lot happening, and indeed, but I think Christian organizations often take the lead in finding ethical investments, and for example, also the Church of England is now trying to only invest, and they have a lot of money in ethical projects and investments. And I think one source of hope is that so many of the bankers I spoke to, especially when they reached my age, the ones I interviewed were early 40s, they all said that it was proving so unsatisfying, a life devoted to mammon. And that they said, I'm not building anything, I'm not contributing anything, I'm just moving money around and taking a cut. And so, yeah, to raise your children as good as possible, may help.
And that's also a problem, to live in London and try to raise children and pay for it.
It's very difficult everywhere.
Very difficult. Okay, thank you very much, Joris, for spending this short time. As you understand, there's so much more in it. And if you have courage enough to read this book, because it will shake the foundations of our understanding of the world, you should buy it and read it. Thank you for helping us, and you are really a teacher for us to understand the world where we are and the challenge to be a human being today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.